Welcome back. You're watching News Gang. So even with all the political rhetoric, there seem to be some people who are thinking of what happens and where we go from here. Even with all of people on either side standing their ground and nobody ceding and perhaps being the bigger person in the room. But we're hearing now a call we are very familiar with, perhaps all too familiar in this country. Let's listen to Deputy President Kithure Kindiki.
Plead with you, fellow countrymen. We cannot build this country through chaos, through incitement, and through violence. We must learn to resolve our national problems through consultations, discussions, and through peaceful means. Na wale wananchi ambao wako na maoni tofauti, wako na uhuru wa kutoa maoni tofauti, bora wafanye hivyo kwa njia ya amani.
So that was a little bit general, but then it got more specific and with some perhaps reminiscences of what we just saw with the election of a pope recently. This is Raila's very specific proposal as to where we go from here.
An inclusive, intergenerational, national conclave to hear our people across all divides and come up with irreducible reforms and changes necessary to take the country forward. So the conclave I envisage comes up with better and sustainable ways for addressing transparency, accountability, and impunity, especially with regard to corruption, and ensuring that leaders are held accountable for their actions. I propose that the forum comes up with a comprehensive and sustainable strategy for addressing youth unemployment and expansion of opportunities for youth in the formal and informal sectors. Such a national conclave must have clear terms of reference and be populated and helmed by the most serious and sober minds in our nation. The proceeds of the national dialogue be subjected to a referendum.
So, so first of all, a conclave is, do you want to define that for us? I feel, in fact, ill-placed or ill-equipped to do that. But we'll get to the definition of it in a moment. But yeah, that's Raila Odinga's prescription.
You know, for sure, we need a solution out of this. We cannot continue like this because if it's about protests, killings, destruction of property, then the government comes and says that watajua hawajui. Then we have another wave. Then there's some orders given across different parts of the country, orders that have no legal bearing but have an impact on the national mood and even where we go as a country. There has to be someone or something being done to really resolve some of these concerns. And this is an opportunity that has been missed since June 2024, after that acknowledgement of what had happened. You recall the statement of the president on the 26th of June 2024, and subsequently in different platforms, including the interview with Linus and two other journalists. So an acknowledgement then that there was a problem, and then coming up with some of the solutions, which included, of course, cutting on national expenditure or government expenditure, which obviously we know now because you've seen some of the reports of the financial year 2024-2025, it was just lip service because it was never implemented, and never mind that it has an impact, again, on the country because 1 year later we are talking about these matters because there are several things that have not been resolved. So the statement by Professor Kithure Kindiki, I must say, is a welcome one, that someone is acknowledging there's a problem and calling for dialogue. But then the question is, how do we do that dialogue? I can see the struggle with the former Prime Minister who has called for dialogue on so many occasions. Sometimes he calls it dialogue, sometimes he says national conversation, sometimes he calls it let's talk. It was once building bridges under President Uhuru Kenyatta's tenure. It became the National Dialogue Committee under William Ruto, and recently became an MOU between UDA and ODM, which is the highest sort of cooperation agreement we have seen between a ruling party and the party that lost the election. For him to cite a national conclave, first of all, it's a contradiction, because if you have to strictly define what a conclave is, and you'll benefit from that by looking at what different sites are saying. So in the Roman Catholic Church, it is the Assembly of Cardinals for the election of a pope.
But please define how they do it.
The last I checked, we had a pope. But the other thing is that the meaning of conclave is a private meeting or secret assembly, especially a meeting of Roman Catholic cardinals. So, of course, it's not an exclusive title for the meeting of cardinals, but there's that element that it's private, it's secret, and sometimes or most times it is confidential. But now the former Prime Minister is calling for that national conclave, and there's something interesting that he says to us at the end. Let me just say, a national conclave to hear our people across all divides and come up with irreducible reforms. Again, reforms to the Constitution. Now, NADCO came up with a report and recommended different changes to laws and the Constitution. Of course, that's why perhaps tomorrow we'll have new commissioners in office. It's a product of NADCO and thereafter legislation by Parliament. Now, he also says that that team should only have the most serious and sober minds in our nation. Who are these people?
Who are they?
Because there are very many serious people, very many sober people. Unfortunately, we don't see many of them in our political leadership at the moment. Yet, if it has a way of ending up in a referendum, unless it's a people-led initiative or popular initiative to amend a constitution, because what do you take to a referendum? Is it a constitutional amendment or it's just thoughts? If it's a constitutional amendment, then it has to be a popular initiative. When you talk about a conclave, a national conclave, leading to that process, you'd expect that it has to go through Parliament. So maybe it's a parliamentary initiative, but then what was the National Dialogue Committee about? It was also a parliamentary initiative that has led us to where we are. Again, if you look at what the leaders have been saying, several members of Parliament indeed, and you look at the platforms on X, on Facebook, or whatever other platforms on social media that you have, they are actually some of the biggest contributors of the situation we're in, whether it's about ethnicity, ethnic hate, stratification of the country, they are responsible. Yet they sit at the National Assembly or the Senate. If they sit at the National Assembly, they represent the aspirations of the people. But online and other platforms, including public meetings, they're spreading all these other conversations, this hatred against communities and different persons in the country. How then do we walk this journey? So there's a participation, there is a call by the former Prime Minister, who is one of the eldest political leaders or political figures we have in the country. But how do we proceed at a time that we've seen the President coming out and saying what this is?
It's a coup.
Exactly.
So do you talk your way out of a coup? Is that how it works?
Now, those are the questions that I don't know if a conclave can respond to, of sober minds. And an
intergenerational one. We've heard this before, perhaps not used that word, but if you recall last year after the June 2024 protests, the President attempted to put together a 100-member committee to talk. I think initially it didn't quite include young people. The young people complained, then they were added, and that disappeared out. We didn't hear much of it. Jamila, we talk a lot.
We talk a lot, Yvonne, and in past attempts, you mentioned a few of them, what we were talking about, elite consensus. There were people at that level who ended up dishing out positions so that things can quiet down. Because of this whole thing about ethnicity, it comes in there, because you have this belief that tukipatia kiti people from particular communities, watu watatulia. That thing of mtu wetu akipata sisi pia tumepata. But that would not work this time, because there has to be something different. The young people have come out in ways that they never have in the past. They want things to change, because if you look at the things that they're asking for, opportunities. They want better use of resources. They want more accountability. They want good governance. They want jobs. They want opportunities. And those things need to be seen to be given umuhimu, the fact that we're actually listening to what you're saying. Will this mean that you have an open dialogue with a lot of young people in it? I don't know. But what I do know is that it has to be different from what we've seen in the past. It cannot be people at that top level talking amongst themselves and deciding to reward themselves, hoping that that would sort things out. Kenyans have a dream about what kind of Kenya they want for themselves and for the future. And it's important that what the dream that they envision needs to look like there are people who want it to come to become a reality. What exactly is this? And of course, using constitutional means to get to the point where people feel like we're included, we're being listened to, our problems are being given importance, there's priority. We have that we are looking like we have a plan to go where we should be. Because Yvonne, you mentioned here before how we do not want to see June 25th, 2026 to be what we saw this year. We don't want to see Sabasaba next year to be what we've seen this year. So there are things that have to be done for us not to see what we've seen this year.
And you know, it's even about, on one hand, you hear, you know, what's being said as an attempt to overthrow the government and I am president and this is what's going to happen and this is what will not happen. Are these the people you want to speak with? So there's, one hand, there's this tone that says no. And then on the other hand, there is, you know, one that says, okay, let's sit down and talk. What does that table look like? And are we even at that point where temperatures are calmer for us to do that? There's been a response to that call for an intergenerational national conclave. Martha Karua was here with me earlier on Tuesday and responded to that call.
Together on that one.
Okay.
You cannot dialogue with somebody who has put a foot on your throat. And by choosing to identify with the boot, the person putting the boot on the throat of Kenyans, then that voice does not sound the same to me as it sounded before. So I talked of Kenyans of goodwill. So his voice is masked by the voice of the blood-based government.
So, Linus, we've had a broad-based government before that, and you see all of these attempts. We had the BBI, we've had NADCO, now there is this one. And let's, of course, all remember when, as a country, we were brought down to a point where we needed to talk. Again, at least in the most recent past, which was the Constitution of Kenya following the 2007-2008 crisis. We put in a new constitution, but here we are talking again, and it costs money. You know, this talking isn't for free. So now we're talking again. To what end? After June 2024, they said they had talked and they brought in a new bunch of cabinet secretaries, and the rallying call over the last couple of months since they came in was, I mean, but everybody is now in government, so you know we're all one. Tunaunganisha nchi. But obviously, that wasn't the right prescription for the ailment that we have now. So we're talking again. Is that the way out, or do we have other options?
I think the current political class is in a very, very difficult space, in the sense that we are now dealing as a country with a younger generation that is more educated than the generation that is in charge of the political responsibilities. And that's why answering their questions have been such a tough call. One thing that we need to start making easy to do in this country is the ease of conducting elections, and credible elections at that, where leaders can be changed peacefully and legally and constitutionally without much drama. Because I have noticed when you listen to the tone of the young people, a majority of them are not interested in any talks. They're just interested in an election date. They want to vote. They want to make a decision on who should be running their affairs. So that's one of the things that we really need to, the political class of the moment owes this country, is finally structures that can make elections demystified, easy to hold, results are accepted whichever way they go, because the older generation has suddenly, since June last year, been overtaken by events, which is why, and some spoke about the many attempts that we've had at these talks. You remember the talks that were supposed to be held immediately after the events of June last year. And it didn't take place because basically, especially the younger generation, did not think anything will come out of it. There's also something that they raised last year and across the year. What needs to change is the software of how we do things as a country. They spoke about integrity. Yeah. They spoke about depoliticizing places like churches. Mm-hmm. Do we need to talk about that? Do we need a conclave for that? We don't. The youth last year demanded a behavior change from the current leaders. I don't remember them saying, leave now, but they demanded immediately that you change your behavior, especially when it comes to things like show of opulence that is obviously related to public access to public resources. So when the youth are asking for this, what should be the response? The response should have been a society that then transforms itself. But have we changed from the society that we were before June last year? Hardly. You can see from their social media postings that they feel nothing changed. So this is going to be a tough call. When that call for dialogue, and I think we've all made that call that you need to talk, we need to find out what is going on. There's still probably a need for that conclave, but among the political class, because the political class then needs to, and by the way, they are bunched together. If they think the opposition and government is different, that is not how the youth are perceiving them. The youth are seeing them as one whole bunch that doesn't understand them, doesn't understand the situation they are in. So they actually need that conclave. It should be, it can even be a secret. They can go to Naivasha, they can go to wherever. Yes.
Amongst themselves?
Amongst themselves. Okay. Because they actually have a common problem. They have a common problem. You know, they think it's not just about President Ruto, it's also the opposition and whoever else is out there in the current political class. There is this general dissatisfaction with what is on offer currently as political leadership. And to address that, you first of all need to actually understand what are these youth saying and how do we approach it. So first, the political class needs a conclave just to go and do language study and to understand what it is that the protesters are exactly saying.
But maybe while they're in there, go in with a copy of the Constitution of Kenya, maybe do a refresher, a reminder of the laws of the land.
You know, Yvonne, I don't remember what number it was. The parliament that was led by Kenneth Marende, which one was that, 10th or 11th?
I don't remember the number. Oh.
We are now at 13th, 12th, 11th. I think it was 10th, the one that gave us the Constitution. And you recall that the country was more divided than it is today. Yet it is one parliament that was able to give us the Constitution. Of course, the Grand National, what was the name? The Grand Coalition Government.
Yes.
And at the same time gave us very many statutes to implement the new Constitution, some of which we talk about today were passed by that parliament. So really, it started off with serious warring factions. If you had to talk about the one led by Raila Odinga and the one that was led by Mwai Kibaki. And interestingly enough, the people that we have today, some of them were also part of that, including Martha Karua, who was on the side of Mwai Kibaki. So if that parliament was able to sit and diagnose what the problem was in the country and come up with a solution, how about today? And I know there are all these manner of challenges of people that speak recklessly, whether it's to the microphone or on social media. I think Parliament has an opportunity because they have until 2027 August, or when a new Parliament is elected. So that's about 2 years and above. they have an opportunity to really diagnose what this problem is. And you see, just to remind them and to appeal to them, they are an independent arm of government, meaning that whatever they decide to do would actually have the coverage of the Constitution. So really, because they represent the people, there are about 416 of them, including those that there are vacancies which may be filled very soon. So for those that sit in the National Assembly and the Senate, how about just swallowing your pride a little bit, sit, listen to one another, diagnose the problem, visit your constituencies, not to speak to them or speak at them on what you think is the problem with the country, but to hear them. What exactly is the problem? If you're able to decode what the problem is, depending on the different generations, the young people, those that are in school, those that are young parents, those that are just about to retire, what are their greatest fears? Listen to what they are saying. It has been possible before because just last week or the week before, the House was able to pass a constitutional amendment bill with 304 supporting at the second reading, 298 supporting at the third reading. How about just listen to your constituents and come back to the House and have a conversation amongst yourselves because you are elected in this parliament, the 13th parliament. Maybe if you try that, we might see how it goes. And most importantly, during that mobilization, how about they leave out the national government?
Yeah.
How about they leave out even the, what do you call it, NGAO, National Government Administration officers at the ground level? Yeah. Just go straight to the people. They voted for you directly.
The same way they went to them when they were seeking their vote.
Exactly. Hear them and see what you can do with that information so that in the end we might say that, yes, the situation was whatever it was, but they made an attempt. But otherwise, we cannot get to 2027 like this.
The difference, though, between this parliament and then, and the reason I think they were able to sit down and do what you're saying, was because we had the international community that intervened in what was happening here. To be quite honest, we were not able to sort that out ourselves. And so we had everybody shining a spotlight and literally prescribing what our National Assembly needed to do, and many of the other bodies, because we have proven many times in this country that we cannot do it on our own. This is not a call for intervention from, outside forces, but just a point to note, even then, it wasn't of their own volition, particularly.
And you're right, we work under strict supervision.
Yeah.
We function so well, especially when we have a few foreigners around.
Yes.
And this document that we are so grateful to have today, that is called the Constitution of Kenya 2010, was a product of very good supervision as well from a number of people. And there lies our big problem, and the problem of the parliament that Sam is talking about. You see, one should stop to actually wonder what it would have been if this generation of politicians was in charge of the independence talks that were taking place in Lancaster in the UK.
The LegCo.
What if this generation of politicians, this parliament, was actually there in the middle of the Cold War, when the world was such a fluid place, complex, issues were really, really complex? How would it have been? You actually shudder at the thought of what would have happened. So there's a lot of institutional corrections that need to happen. Today I saw the Speaker of the National Assembly operating from some rally in North Rift. Was it called what are they called?
The Empowerment.
Yeah. The Empowerment. Speaker of the National Assembly hanging around with MPs out there and
singing the KK song,
dancing, and in those. I hope there are no Sisos cuts involved, considering the traditions of different communities. But that is the entire office out there. Mm-hmm. Some expecting climb down from an Anandakoi rally to leading an institution that is independent of the executive, that your other arms of government, is not easy. Now, when Koech, an MP, pretends to call for a shoot to kill, is not reading that same constitution. Do we need supervisors also for us to read the constitution? That indeed the Inspector General of Police is not under any direction. That Inspector General of Police is supposed to make those independent decisions. But you remember the Kilimani video where the president was speaking. Who was standing behind there?
Yeah.
The entire national security apparatus. And they are standing there. You saw the Inspector General of Police,
smiling,
the DCI was there, the Deputy IG was there. You know, do you think they're actually capable of the independence that the Constitution envisaged? And as long as we don't read the Constitution and implement it, so much so that our youth can look at Parliament and say they can expect leadership. And let's not, to be fair to previous parliaments, there have been leadership out of some of those houses. Yeah. And I remember as I was a young reporter when the National Constitution Executive Council of Professor Kivutha Kibwana, they had very, very bad demonstrations as well, violent protests that preceded the talks to review the Constitution. It was a result of pressure. But I remember the House and the President rising to the occasion. And you know, you would feel it when the President and the opposition are having dialogue in Harambee House. The country actually stops and waits for its leaders to discuss. I think our youth have seen this huge gap in leadership. They know that there's nothing to expect from the National Assembly. In fact, the Speaker is out there in the rallies with his MPs, who is supposed, by the way, to later call them to order in the House. You know, there should have been some space.
Distance,
Distance. Just keep off a bit. Preserve your ability to sit in the... Oh, and the Speaker, by the way, is...
third in line.
Third in line, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, meaning that's a potential president. And you see them, you know, sitting in some of those places, and you expect to, you know, it brings down the entire institution. Yeah. To that level of that platform in Abkoi. And these are some of the problems that we've gone through. When institutions are weakened, then let's not be surprised when this young, better educated, agile young population says we can see there is a vacuum across institutions, there is a vacuum, and they don't expect leadership and answers from the current political class.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Jamila, it's time to end this.
Tumemaliza, yes. I think we can let the youngest amalize kitu.
Age before beauty.
Exactly.
On my Sense tonight, I reflect on a concept that goes by the name adulthood. It is a concept that can be understood biologically, legally, psychologically, socially, and in Kenya, I must add in caps, politically. As a nation made up of communities rooted in culture, tradition, and belief systems, we know what references to adulthood sound like. Sometimes we get those harsh reminders like act your age, pick someone your size, and polite versions like grow up. All of them reminders of adulthood. Within the family setup, it is the adults that make the big decisions about the present and future of that unit. The children, on the other hand, go through the motions, from total dependence to being guided up the various steps of life's ladder. Away from the individual, many traditional communities in this part of the world were and perhaps still are organized in age sets, a structure where people initiated together shared identity and expectations. There is a collective behavioral pattern required of age sets. If you went through the rite of passage in year 1 or year 7, your conduct was still expected to align. You are of the same age set. But maybe I am talking about old times. Today, our modern age sets are our institutions, defined by the Constitution of Kenya. Take Parliament, for example, whose slogan is, "For the welfare of society and just government of the people." In this institution, it doesn't matter if you come from the most populous constituency like Roiro or the smallest like Lamu East. They are all equals. Figuratively, they are an age set of sorts and are expected to be of same behavior. They are the adults in the room or house. Further up in modern institutions, the pyramid narrows to the tip. And as it narrows, numbers drop, but responsibilities rise. At the top of the pyramid is not privilege. It is restraint and responsibility. In traditional society, the peak of the pyramid was reserved for the chief, the age-set leader. His behavior was not group-driven. It was anchored in wisdom, steadiness, and service. I am not a philosopher, but societies, whether old or modern, is organized in those enduring pyramids. What else is enduring as the pyramid is the top-down, bottom-up social contract between the two ends of the pyramid. At a basic level, the social contract expects more from the adults, and depending on the level of the individual in the ladder of the pyramid, some responsibilities are heavier than others. Then there's a little science in this pyramid. A heavy, restless, turbulent apex that is prone to constant rocking can tip the pyramid. The structure only works if the top stays steady and the base stays strong. Back to the story of the individual, children behave as the custodial adult directs or allows. The adult does not command the status of fatherhood or motherhood. They are a father or mother because of how they conduct themselves. Fathers play the role of a father, and mothers, the mothers. And if out of frustration the mother barks at the children, they still must remember they have a duty to bring back the children to the line. If they don't, they must ready for a turbulent adolescence and reckless adulthood, which then becomes their legacy. That's my sense tonight.
There's a script that plays on repeat after every protest in this country. It doesn't matter who is protesting. It doesn't matter what they're saying. And it certainly doesn't matter how peacefully they do it. The response, like clockwork, is the same. Foreign agents, treason, an attempt to overthrow the government. In 2024, the Ford Foundation was publicly blamed until the accusation was quietly withdrawn. The president, if you recall, called protesters treasonous criminals. This year, the deputy president and other members of the executive claimed that there is an active attempt to topple the government. Now let's just pause and take that in, because treason is not a slogan. It is a serious criminal offense. It is one of the gravest charges in any country. Attempting to overthrow the government is not an opinion. It's a very serious charge. And a coup? Well, that's not a PR problem. That is a national security emergency. So here's the question. If that's really what's happening, why hasn't anyone been arrested? This government has access to intelligence briefs, surveillance capabilities, the DCI, the NIS, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. If there's truly a coup being plotted with foreign money and local collaborators, then you have the tools, you have the power, and you have the duty to act. I mean, as the world's most famous sports brand says, and no, this is not an endorsement, just do it. Arrest the conspirators, charge them, take them to court, protect the state. Because if someone is truly attempting to overthrow a democratically elected government, you don't call a press conference, you don't post a hashtag, you don't insinuate or imply, you act. But if you don't, then you're doing something else. You're playing politics, you're spinning narratives, and you're using national security as an excuse, a narrative and a pretext to something more ominous, to clamp down on any voices of discontent. And that is dangerous. When a protest is painted as a plot against the government and every chant is called foreign-funded treason, then the burden of proof immediately falls on those alleging to table the evidence. When such a serious claim comes from the president or the cabinet secretary in charge of national security, they become duty-bound to prove the allegations and act for the sake of the credibility of the offices they hold, if not for their own personal credibility. It's also a good way of office holders to show that they respect the intelligence of not just those they work with, but also those to whom their messages are directed. An ordinary mwananchi is not exactly a moron. He or she is a citizen of a country that enjoys one of the highest literacy rates in the world. Some of them are old enough to have witnessed every trick in the Kenyan political bags. Some of them took part in countrywide, state-organized demonstrations against General Odongo and his terror outfit, oddly named the February 18 Revolutionary Army, FERA. It was a thrilling episode of euphoric national fiction, organized by the state, invoking the oldest excuse in the book, national security. Now, before we burn any effigies, let us have the real suspects this time. Give us the coup plotters. Arrest them dramatically and produce them in the nearest terror or treason court. But if this is all spin and part of a protracted post-election fallout, then let's give Kenyans a break by respecting their intelligence and the intelligence of their security and intelligence services. That's my take.
On my kicker tonight, 2 Kenyans have exercised their freedom of expression and freedom of conscience, as well as right to belief and opinion. Let's listen to them.
Nalishukuru Rais William Samoei Ruto. Wakati jana umesema shoot but do not kill. I want to repeat it here. In fact, shoot and kill. You cannot have someone coming after your life and you do not want to shoot and kill.
Wewe ni ndugu, wewe ni dada ya mtu. Unatumwa kwenda ku abduct mtu ambaye hana silaha, si mgaidi na si mwizi wa mali ya umma. Jiulize hii swali. For how long am I going to be used by this government to continue making the children of other people suffer?
Now, the first speaker, Nelson Koech, is a member of parliament, chairperson of the National Assembly Defense, Intelligence and Foreign Relations Committee, and a man of significant connections to the political power center. The second speaker is new to many Kenyans, including myself. He is called Godfrey Masiaga Kakan Mayo, a young man who posted his opinion on TikTok, an opinion that earned him a visit by officers of the Directorate of Criminal Investigations, DCI. From his post, Mayo is extremely upset with the spate of abductions in Kenya, and his sense of justice is unmistakably strong.
A time is coming. You guys will go to abduct someone, and most of you will not go back to the stations alive. Mark my words.
Now, for this, admittedly fiery, justice and fairness spirited post, Mayo was arrested by the DCI ostensibly for inciting violence against the police. Never mind that some of the consequences Mayo is evoking are divine and unspecified. He is inviting, or is it inciting God, the Almighty, to deliver justice for families of victims of abduction.
The wrath of God will descend upon you, and most of you will not return to the stations alive. Mark my words.
Now, in dashing to arrest this young man, the authorities are yet again missing another opportunity to do nothing but listen. A young man has expressed something he felt so strongly about. What if this is exactly how 1 million other young Kenyans feel tonight? How many DCI raids would fix that? Let's reflect. That's my kicker.
My memo tonight is an alarm bell. I ring it loud, first on behalf of Kenyan parents, and indeed every right-thinking Kenyan who is tonight equally perturbed by what I'm about to talk about. You see, leaders, especially political leaders, have taken to lecturing parents about the upbringing of children. They have been insinuating that Gen Z protesters as ill-mannered and poorly raised. I compiled some excerpts from the lecture series from our leaders.
Parents must be at the center, making sure that not only are our children in class, but we also mentor them so that we can build good character.
Vijana wetu, wasichana kwa vijana, wengi wanaandika mambo machafu sana. Wengi wanatuma vitu mbaya sana. Kila mtu kaishe mtoto wako na umuongeleshe.
They speak of discipline, values, morality. Talk of preaching water and drinking wine. Have you been watching our political leaders on the campaign trail lately? Have you seen how crude and crass it is getting out there on the podium? Leadership used to be about matters above the neck. But lately, the altitude has dropped dramatically, even below basic decency.
Mzuri, mwanaume aliye na afya na akili timamu aendangi raundi moja. Anaendanga raundi moja.
Na nyinyi wa mama mnajua yule mwanamume mmoja si yule anaenda 1 round. Si anaenda raundi ya pili na ya tatu. Sasa mnataka kushukisha William Ruto 1 round.
Una hii mbegu yangu ikimix mnaonaje? Ndio sababu nasema mimi leo sirudi na hii weather.
Siku hizi wanaume wamesahau, wanatupiga na mapanga, wanatupiga na marungu, na Mungu aliwapatia kitu ambaye wanatakana kutupiga nayo.
Nataka kuuliza hapa na munishike vizuri. Mtu anasikianga utamu saa zile yuko ndani ama nje?
Huyu mama akiwa kwa kitandani si unalala kabisa Utaamuka kesho ingine sio? Atosha atoshi.
You have seen and heard it for yourselves. Now sit back and wait for your next lecture on how to bring up your children and how to raise them into responsible, patriotic citizens.
Ulisikia nyenga ati hai cousin. Ukifika Ukambani nyai cousin. Ukija Mwatate unasema nyinyi mashemeji zangu.
And that is my memo.
Yeah.
It's not even midnight yet.
Yeah. Jamila.
Gituku tusome maoni ya wananchi.
Yeah, Wakenya wameongea. Wamesema kwamba hamkuongea kuhusu property that was destroyed. Wengine wamesema kwamba let me just look at this. Someone saying that, where is it? 11:22 p.m. Someone said that, yes, that's exactly what I'm reading. You have not spoken about the property that was destroyed. And then there's someone else who says that it is very ironical when the government side points fingers to goons who infiltrate protests and cause destruction of property. Can the government look Kenyans direct in the eyes and tell them the owners of the goons? If at one stage or another, goons carrying with them crude weapons are seen walking side by side with the police, who eventually turn against unarmed protesters, shooting at them left, right, and center, the common Kenyan is left mesmerized. I choose to remain anonymous. They're not sharing what their name is. Then there's someone here who says that I have followed. Yes, if we borrow a leaf from the 10th Parliament, we can deliver better Kenya, indeed even the Kenyan dream. Speaker, I was never under external supervision. We're still trying to check if that's actually the 10th Parliament Speaker, Kenneth Morende, but he has shared with us that view. And yeah, so in exact response to the person who raised these questions about property destroyed, I think one of the most devastating facts was to see much of this property being destroyed is wealth of the first generation. These are not people that have had several generations of wealth. This is their attempt at life.
Building generational wealth.
Exactly, at supporting their families. So to see Maguna supermarket, a county supermarket, and I think there was another one in another...
The lady who had her 3 supermarkets
yes.
looted and destroyed? Yes.
Yes,
right.
so it's so unfortunate, and I think we have to find a solution, but while at it, if police officers are available to barricade roads so that you don't get into the city, maybe we should also have heightened support for property also outside Nairobi.
Yeah, and not to mention the lives and futures that have been lost
disrupted.
And completely disrupted by young men and women who are being killed every day, usually in their prime, just sort of starting in their careers and their lives with young families, and that is all, of course, nipped in the bud. 31 people